Stop whatever you are doing for a moment. Seriously. If you have even a small patch of soil, one raised bed, a few fabric grow bags sitting on a sunny patio, or just a single pot on your balcony, what I'm about to share may be more valuable than another trip to the garden center this season, because right now, we are standing in the heart of July. The sun is strong, the air is heavy with that rich midsummer warmth, and gardens everywhere are bursting with life. Tomatoes are swelling on the vine. Zucchini leaves are stretching wide. Summer crops are taking up space, and many spring crops are already fading away. And this is exactly where so many home gardeners make a costly mistake without realizing it. They look at the garden and quietly decide the planting season is finished. They see the beans already picked, the lettuce gone bitter, the peas cleared out, and they tell themselves, that's it for this year. I'll plant again next spring. So the empty spaces begin to appear. A row where spring greens once grew is left bare. A container that could still feed a family sits dry in the corner. A raised bed gets cleared, but nothing new goes in. Week after week, the soil lies open under the hot sun, drying out, hardening, and wasting some of the best growing conditions of the entire year. After many years of working with soil, crops, and backyard gardens, I can tell you this clearly. July is not the end of the planting season. For a skilled gardener, July is one of the most powerful moments to begin again. Here is the secret many beginners miss. July soil is warm, active, and full of biological energy. A seed that struggled for 2 cold weeks to wake up in April can often germinate in only 4 or 5 days in July. The soil is no longer cold and sluggish. It is alive, ready, and welcoming. The days are still long enough to push fast growth, and if you choose the right vegetables, there is still plenty of time to take them from seed to harvest before the first autumn frost arrives. This is where experience changes everything. An average gardener sees an empty bed and thinks the season is fading. A wise gardener sees that same empty bed and sees opportunity. That warm soil is not wasted ground. It is a second chance. It is a fresh start. It is a chance to grow food for late summer, fall, and even the first cold weeks of the season. And maybe this is why gardening teaches us so much beyond vegetables. Don't we do the same thing in our own lives? We reach the middle of a season and assume it is too late to begin. We think the best time has already passed. We leave good ground unused inside ourselves, waiting for some perfect future spring, while the soil beneath our feet is already warm, ready, and full of possibility. So today, let's go beyond the usual garden advice. I want to walk you through 15 vegetables you should plant in July as soon as possible. Not only because they can give you a beautiful autumn harvest, but because each one carries a practical lesson about timing, patience, resilience, and knowing how to use the season you are actually in. Let's begin. 1. Cucumbers. Rising above the mold. If you have grown cucumbers for more than one season, you probably know this scene very well. By the middle of July, the vines you planted back in may often begin to look tired. Powdery mildew spreads across the leaves like pale gray dust. The stems lose their strength, and the harvest slows down until you are picking only 1 or 2 fruits where you once gathered baskets. Many gardeners accept this as the natural end of cucumber season. But with experience, you learn that July can be the perfect time to start a fresh round. Plant cucumber seeds now, especially in the first weeks of July, and the warm soil will work in your favor. A variety like Lebanese mini muncher, known for thin skin and steady production, can germinate in only 4 to 6 days. That is much faster than spring planting, when cold soil often makes seeds hesitate. A July sowing can reach its best production in September, after the harshest August heat has passed. The disease pressure is often lower. The fruit can be crisp and sweet, and the plants have the energy of a fresh start. But there is one rule I would not ignore: grow them upward. Cucumbers left to sprawl across damp soil sit in poor air circulation, where fungal spores, moisture, and pests can build up quickly. Give them a trellis, a fence, or even a few strong bamboo poles, and the whole crop changes. The leaves breathe better, the vines stay cleaner, the fruit hangs straight, and you can find each cucumber before it becomes overgrown and bitter. The life lesson. Sometimes, We also need a structure that lifts us above old conditions. If we stay spread out in the same damp places, surrounded by the same stagnant habits, we cannot expect to stay healthy and sweet. A trellis in life may be a routine, a mentor, a discipline, or a person who helps us climb toward better air. So ask yourself, what is helping you rise toward the light right now? 2. Zucchini. Outsmarting the storm. Zucchini is famous for abundance. One healthy plant can give more fruit than a family knows what to do with. But it is also famous for one of the most frustrating garden failures, a strong, beautiful plant that suddenly collapses almost overnight. Very often, the cause is squash vine borer. This moth lays eggs near the base of squash stems in late spring. When the larvae hatch, they tunnel into the vine and feed from the inside. By the time the plant wilts, the damage has usually been done deep in the stem where you cannot easily see it. This is where timing becomes a powerful tool. In many northern and midwestern regions, the main egg-laying period of the squash vine borer is finished by late June or early July. That means zucchini planted from seed in July can often miss the most dangerous window. By the time your young plants are growing strongly, the worst pressure has already passed. In warm July soil, zucchini seeds usually sprout in 4 to 7 days. With good moisture and rich soil, you can begin harvesting in about 40 to 50 days. Varieties like yellow crookneck or patty pan can give you a productive late-season crop when many earlier plants are already exhausted. For gardeners in warmer southern areas, there may be a second generation of borers, so protection still matters. A lightweight row cover over young plants during their first few weeks can give them a much better start. Remove it when flowering begins so pollinators can reach the blossoms. The life lesson. Sometimes, the wisest way to survive a battle is not to stand in the middle of it. In gardening and in life, timing can protect what effort alone cannot. We often rush into new beginnings when conditions are hostile, then wonder why our energy collapses. Maybe some seeds in your life would grow better if you waited until the storm had passed. 3. Bush beans, the shield of moisture. Many gardeners sow bush beans once in spring, harvest for a few weeks, and then assume the season is finished when production slows. But that is not the full story of beans. That is only the story of one planting. Bush beans are excellent for July sowing because they grow quickly in warm soil. Seeds can germinate in about 8 to 10 days, and many varieties reach harvest in 50 to 55 days. That means a July planting can give you fresh, tender beans in September, right when the weather begins to cool and the pods often become sweeter and more pleasant to eat. Compact varieties like Jade or Bonanza are especially useful if you garden in raised beds or small spaces. They do not need large trellises. They stay manageable, and they can still produce a generous harvest from a modest patch of soil. But July bean planting has one serious challenge: moisture. The top inch of soil can dry out very quickly under the summer sun. If the seed swells with water and then dries out before roots establish, germination becomes weak or uneven. The simple solution is mulch. After planting and watering well, cover the row with a light layer of straw. This protects the soil surface from direct sun, holds moisture longer, and creates a cooler, more stable place for the seeds to wake up. You are not just watering the crop, you are protecting the tiny environment where life begins. The life lesson: new beginnings are delicate. A fresh idea, a new habit, a young relationship, or a quiet dream cannot always survive if left exposed to harsh heat too soon. It needs a shield during the early days. So when you begin something important, ask yourself, what is your mulch? What protects that small new life until it has roots of its own? 4. Radishes, the art of timely departure. Radishes are one of the fastest crops in the garden. Varieties like Cherry Belle or French Breakfast can be ready in only 25 to 35 days. That speed makes them exciting, especially for gardeners who want a quick harvest from a small space. But radishes are also unforgiving in heat. In early summer, when the soil is hot and moisture is uneven, they can turn woody, hollow, overly sharp, and unpleasant to eat. This is why July radishes need a little strategy. The better approach is to sow them toward the end of July, when the days are just beginning to shift toward cooler conditions. Keep the soil consistently moist because radishes grow best when they never have to struggle between drought and sudden watering. Stress is what turns them tough and fiery. Most importantly, harvest them on time. Radishes do not improve by being left in the ground. If you wait too long, even by a few days, the crisp sweetness can disappear. The root becomes pithy, bitter, and hollow. Mark your planting date, start checking them as they size up, and pull them when they are young and firm. The life lesson. There is wisdom in knowing when something is ready, and there is also wisdom in knowing when to let it go. Some good things in life are meant to be brief, fresh, and sharp in the best way. When we hold on too long, what was once sweet can become bitter. What are you still leaving in the ground after its best moment has passed? 5. Lettuce. Finding the cool shadows. Lettuce is tender, rewarding, and beautiful, but it has a clear limit. When temperatures stay above 80 degrees, lettuce begins to panic. Instead of producing sweet leaves, it rushes toward flowering. This is called bolting. Once that happens, the leaves become bitter, the plant stretches upward, and the harvest is mostly over. Still, you can grow lettuce in July if you understand how to protect it from heat. Varieties such as Summer, Crisp, or Grand Rapids are better choices because they handle warmth more patiently than delicate spring types. The first technique is shade. Plant lettuce where it receives protection from the harsh afternoon sun. This might be beside taller crops, under a trellis, behind tomatoes, or beneath a shade cloth. Even partial shade can lower soil temperature enough to keep the plants calmer and more productive. The second technique is handling the seed correctly. Lettuce seed can suffer from thermoinhibition, which means it may refuse to sprout when soil temperatures are too high. To improve germination, soak the seeds in cool water for about 16 hours before planting. Then start them in a cooler, shaded place until they wake up. Once the seedlings are strong, move them into a protected spot in the garden. With lettuce, the goal is not to fight summer directly. The goal is to create a cooler pocket inside summer where tender growth can still happen. The life lesson. When the world becomes too hot, too loud, and too demanding, we do not have to become bitter. Like lettuce, we can look for shade. We can protect our minds, choose quieter spaces, and keep growing something tender even in a harsh season. Where is the cool shadow in your life, and are you giving yourself permission to rest there? 6. Carrots. The magic of the wooden board. Carrots are one of the most satisfying root crops you can pull from the garden in late autumn. Varieties like Danvers or Nantes can give you firm, sweet, deeply colored roots when the weather cools. But if you have ever tried sowing carrot seeds in July, you already know the challenge. Getting them to germinate can be frustrating. Carrot seeds are tiny, and they must be planted very shallowly. That means they depend on steady surface moisture. In July, the sun can dry the top layer of soil almost as soon as you finish watering. The seed begins to wake up, then the soil crusts over, moisture disappears, and that fragile life dries out before it ever has a chance to break through. This is where the wooden board trick becomes extremely useful. After sowing your carrot seeds and watering the row deeply, lay a plain, untreated wooden board directly over the planted area. The board blocks the harsh sun, slows evaporation, and keeps the soil beneath it moist, cool, and protected. It also helps prevent the surface from baking into a hard crust that young carrot seedlings cannot push through. The key is to check under the board every day. Do not forget it there. The moment you see those first tiny green seedlings beginning to rise, remove the board and let them receive light. Used correctly, this simple method can turn one of the hardest July germination jobs into something much more reliable. The life lesson. There are seasons in life when being covered does not mean being buried. Sometimes we feel hidden, delayed, or pressed down by something heavy. But that covering may be protecting us while we gather strength. Like carrot seeds beneath the board, we may need a quiet, cool, sheltered place before we are ready to break through. Trust the cover, but rise when the time comes. 7. Kale. Sweetened by the frost. Kale is often treated as a spring crop, but gardeners with experience know that July is one of the best times to plant it for a powerful fall harvest. Varieties like Cavolo Nero or Dazzling Blue can grow into strong, productive plants by autumn, giving you leaves that are far better than anything harvested in the stress of summer heat. The real magic happens when cold weather arrives. After the first hard frosts of October or November, kale changes from the inside. To protect itself from freezing, the plant begins converting stored starches into sugars. This natural response helps lower the freezing point inside the plant cells, acting almost like built-in antifreeze. That is why kale harvested after frost tastes so different. The leaves become sweeter, richer, and deeper in flavor. Instead of the tough, slightly bitter taste many people associate with summer kale, frost-kissed kale has a mellow, satisfying sweetness that makes it one of the true treasures of the autumn garden. If you plant kale in July, you give it enough time to establish strong roots and large leaves before the cold arrives. Then, when frost comes, it does not destroy the crop. It improves it. The life lesson. Some of the coldest seasons in life are not there to ruin us. They can draw out strength, sweetness, and depth we did not know we carried. Kale does not become sweeter in comfort. It becomes sweeter through frost. So when life feels cold and difficult, ask yourself what that season may be transforming inside you. 8. Swiss chard. The unwavering light. While traditional spinach struggles in summer heat and quickly bolts, Swiss chard stands strong. This is one of the most dependable leafy crops you can plant in July because it handles both heat and cooler weather with impressive balance. It can grow in full sun, tolerate some shade, and keep producing long after more delicate greens have given up. Planted in July, Swiss chard can give you tender baby leaves in about 4 weeks. If you allow it to grow longer, you can harvest full, colorful stalks in around 60 days. A mix like Old Farmer's Almanac mix brings bright stems in shades of red, yellow, pink, and white, making the garden both productive and beautiful. One thing many people overlook is that Swiss chard gives you 2 different textures in one plant. The leaves cook quickly and can wilt in a hot pan in just a couple of minutes. The thick stems need more time, usually 4 to 5 minutes, and are best cooked separately before adding the leaves. Treat them as 2 ingredients, and the whole dish becomes better. Swiss chard is not just colorful, it is practical, resilient, and generous. Cut the outer leaves and let the center keep growing, and the plant will continue feeding you for weeks. The life lesson. Some plants panic when conditions change, but Swiss chard does not. It keeps standing, keeps showing its color, and keeps producing. Life will bring heat, shade, and cold, often in the same season. The challenge is not to hide your color when conditions shift, but to stay rooted and keep growing through it all. 9. New Zealand spinach. Adapting to the dry ground. Traditional spinach is not built for July heat. Long days and high temperatures push it quickly toward bolting, sometimes before you get a real harvest. But New Zealand spinach is different. It is not true spinach at all, but a separate species that thrives in the heat of July, August, and September without rushing into seed. Its leaves are thick, mild, and earthy, and you can use them much like spinach in the kitchen. They work well sautéed with garlic, stirred into soups, or added fresh to salads when picked young. For gardeners who miss spinach during the hot months, this plant is one of the best substitutes. What makes New Zealand spinach valuable is its resilience. It grows low and wide, hugs the warm soil, and handles dry conditions better than many leafy greens. The seeds are hard and woody, so soaking them overnight before planting helps speed up germination. After that, tuck them into warm soil, keep them moist while they sprout, and let the plant spread. It may not look exactly like the spinach, but it fills the same role when ordinary spinach cannot survive. The life lesson. Sometimes the old path closes because the season is too harsh. That does not mean the dream is finished. It may only mean the form has to change. New Zealand spinach teaches us to adapt without giving up the harvest. When conditions around you change, how can you reshape your plan to keep growing? 10. Beets. The space to grow. A beet pulled from cool autumn soil is one of the most rewarding harvests in the garden. Varieties like Detroit Dark Red or Chioggia can become sweet, earthy, and beautiful when roasted, especially after growing through the late season shift into cooler weather. But if you want round, well-formed roots, you need to understand one important detail. A beet seed is not really one single seed. It is a multigerm cluster, meaning that one rough little seed ball can produce several seedlings at once. When you sow beets, it is common to see 3 or 4 young plants emerging from the same spot. If you leave them crowded together, they will compete for water, nutrients, and space. Instead of forming strong, round roots, they often become thin, twisted, or undersized. That is why thinning is not optional with beets. It is part of growing them well. Once the seedlings are up, choose the strongest ones and thin them so each plant has about 4 inches of space. It may feel harsh to pull healthy seedlings, but that space is what allows the remaining roots to expand properly. Without room, the beet cannot become what it is meant to be. The life lesson. To grow something deep and substantial, we sometimes have to thin the crowd. Too many commitments, too many distractions, and too many half-hearted directions can leave us stretched thin. Beets remind us that space is not wasted. Space is what allows the real root to grow. What needs to be thinned from your life so your strongest self has room to expand. 11. Arugula. Embracing the present moment. If the only arugula you have ever tasted came from a plastic bag at the grocery store, then you have only met a tired version of this crop. Arugula is one of those greens that begins losing its best flavor very quickly after harvest. Within a day, many of its lively, volatile compounds fade, and what remains can taste flat, sharp, or simply bitter. But fresh arugula from the garden is completely different. When you cut young leaves and eat them within minutes, the flavor is bright, peppery, and surprisingly deep, with a nutty finish that store-bought leaves rarely keep. That freshness is the whole reason to grow it yourself. To plant arugula in July, the secret is not to wait too long before harvesting. Do not let the leaves become large, coarse, and tough. Start cutting them when they are only 2 to 3 inches tall. Use scissors, leave the roots in place, and the plant will often push out a new flush of tender leaves in about 10 days. For a steady supply, sow a small patch every 2 weeks. You do not need a large bed. Even a narrow strip of soil can give you enough arugula to add life to salads, sandwiches, eggs, and simple summer meals. With regular sowing and young harvesting, you can carry fresh arugula straight into fall. The life lesson. Some of the best flavors in life cannot be stored, packaged, or delayed. They must be enjoyed while they are fresh. Arugula teaches us to taste the present moment before it fades. Are you living close enough to today's joy? Or are you still trying to preserve something from yesterday that has already lost its flavor? 12. Turnips. True elegance in small things. Turnips have a reputation they do not fully deserve. Many people think of them as tough, starchy, bitter roots, but most of that comes from letting them grow too large and leaving them in the ground too long. When you plant turnips in July and harvest them young, they become a very different vegetable. Varieties like purple top white globe can be reliable and productive, while hackeray is especially known for its mild, sweet, tender texture. The key is to pull them when they are small, about the size of a golf ball or even a little smaller. At that stage, turnips are crisp, juicy, and gentle enough to eat raw. You can slice them into salads, roast them quickly, or eat them with the skin on if they are clean and tender. They do not need to become huge to be useful. In fact, their best quality is often found before they get big. And do not ignore the tops. Turnip greens are a second harvest from the same seed. They bring a peppery bite, useful nutrition, and excellent flavor when cooked simply. One small planting can give you both roots and greens, which makes turnips a smart choice for gardeners who want more food from limited space. The life lesson. We live in a world that often praises size, speed, and scale, as if bigger always means better. But the garden teaches a quieter truth. Some crops are sweetest when they stay small, tender, and humble. Turnips remind us that elegance does not always need to be large to be valuable. Where in your life can you honor the beauty of something small? 13. Collard greens, the silent, sturdy endurance. If kale is the popular green that gets all the attention, collard greens are the steady, quiet workers of the garden. They may not always look glamorous, but they are strong, dependable, and deeply useful, especially when planted for late-season harvests. Collards are among the toughest leafy greens you can plant in summer. A July sowing gives them time to build large, sturdy leaves before autumn arrives. They can stand through the heat of August, the changing weather of September, and even cold conditions later in the season. Like kale, collards become better after frost because the plant converts some of its stored starch into sugars, giving the leaves a deeper, smoother sweetness. For good growth, give collard plants enough room. About 18 inches between plants allows the leaves to expand without crowding. When harvesting, take the lower outer leaves first and leave the central growing point alone. This way, the plant keeps producing upward for months instead of being harvested all at once. Collards are excellent for gardeners who want food security from a small area. They are not fragile, they are not fussy, and they can keep feeding you when other greens have already disappeared. The life lesson: strength does not always need to announce itself. Collards do not shout for attention, yet they endure heat, cold, wind, and time. In life, there is a deep kind of power in standing rooted, doing your work quietly, and continuing forward when conditions are not perfect. Sometimes resilience is the answer. Be steady, be grounded, be the collard green. 14. Scallions. The power of small spaces. Many people think a garden has to be large before it is worth planting, but scallions prove that idea wrong. These are some of the most useful crops you can grow in a tiny space, and they fit beautifully into the edges and corners that many gardeners ignore. A variety like white Lisbon can be sown in a narrow strip of soil along the edge of a raised bed, between slower crops, or even in containers. You do not need much room. A small 6-inch band of soil can give you a steady supply of fresh green onions for the kitchen in about 60 days. The best part is that scallions can give more than one harvest if you cut them correctly. Instead of pulling the whole plant every time, snip the green tops about an inch above the soil. Leave the base and roots in place, and they will regrow. With this simple habit, one planting can provide 3 or 4 rounds of harvest. That makes scallions especially valuable for small space gardeners. They bring sharp, fresh flavor to soups, stir fries, eggs, rice dishes, salads, and almost any simple meal. And because they use so little space, there is very little reason not to grow them. The life lesson: you do not need acres of land to create something useful. You do not need perfect conditions, a large platform, or unlimited resources to add flavor to your life. A small space, used wisely, can produce more than people expect. Scallions remind us to begin where we are, with what we have, and to let small, daily growth become a steady harvest. 15. Brussels sprouts, the hero of the Thanksgiving table. Now we come to the 15th crop, and this one is all about timing. Brussels sprouts are not a casual late planting. They need a long season, usually around 80 to 100 days to mature, which means July is a serious deadline. If you wait too long, the plants may not have enough time to form full sprouts before deep cold arrives. But if you plant them in July, you give them the chance to grow tall and strong through autumn. As the weather cools and frost touches the garden, the sprouts develop a richer, nuttier, sweeter flavor, much like other brassicas that improve in cold conditions. This is why Brussels sprouts can become one of the great late-season rewards. While many people are buying frozen sprouts that cook up soft and dull, you can step into your own garden and harvest a firm, frost-kissed stalk. Fresh Brussels sprouts from the garden have a completely different character when they are grown well and picked at the right time. The important lesson is not to delay. If Brussels sprouts are on your July list, plant them now. This is one crop where a couple of missed weeks can make a real difference between a strong harvest and a disappointing season. The life lesson: nature does not negotiate every deadline. Some opportunities open for only a short window, and once that window closes, no amount of wishing brings the season back. Brussels sprouts remind us that timing matters. There are seeds in life that must be planted when the moment is here. What is the seed you need to plant this week before the season passes? The call to the earth. Look at your garden again. Look at the spaces where spring crops have finished. Look at the empty pots near the porch, the corners of raised beds that are sitting bare, and the rows that have already given one harvest. Those spaces are not empty because the season is over. They are empty because they are ready for another beginning. The soil is warm. The sun is still strong. The days still hold enough energy to grow food. And if you choose the right crops, July can become one of the most productive turning points of your entire gardening year. You now have 15 choices waiting for you. Cucumbers, zucchini, bush beans, radishes, lettuce, carrots, kale, Swiss chard, New Zealand spinach, beets, arugula, turnips, collards, scallions, and Brussels sprouts. Each one offers a harvest, but each one also teaches a lesson about timing, patience, resilience, protection, and the courage to begin again. That is what I love most about gardening. It never lets us believe our story is finished too early. As long as there is warm soil, a little space, and a willing hand, there is still something worth planting. So tell me, which of these vegetables are you going to plant today? Share it in the comments and include your gardening zone so we can learn from one another and build a stronger, more productive gardening community together. And if you want more practical, thoughtful journeys into the soil, make sure you subscribe to Earthly Delights. Now grab your seeds, step outside, and let's grow. I'll see you in the garden.